So for a long time I used to work on geospatial information science related ontology. So GIS is a scientific offshoot of GPS. When they had a lot of GPS information, then they decided, the geographers decided, that they need an information science to deal with GPS information, and so they created geographic information science. And Buffalo is one of the centers of geospatial or geographic information science, and so I became involved with scientists working in that area, and the early history of BFO is very deeply rooted in geospatial information science. So artifacts were created for describing the mereology of spatial regions and the mereotopology of spatial regions by people working in GIS, particularly an artifact called RCC, which is a calculus for dealing with relations of overlap and connectedness between simple spatial regions. Now, I was also interested in geospatial regions from a curiosity point of view. There are some very curiously shaped geospatial regions. For instance, archipelagos or voting districts in Louisiana, or countries that have parts of other countries inside them. And one of the more interesting geospatial phenomena of this sort, which I discovered, is the Eruv. And so what I'm going to be talking about now is the ontology of that peculiar geospatial phenomenon, which is the Eruv. And the Eruv is a geospatial phenomenon which is created not by the planet, but by society. And this is a passage from Norman Malcolm's memoir of Wittgenstein, where he describes how Wittgenstein gave him trees as they were going on walks. Wittgenstein said, "You're not allowed to tell anybody that I just gave you that tree, but that tree is your tree." And of course Wittgenstein didn't even have the right to give away trees in the first place. And so the Eruv is a little bit like that. And there is a Los Angeles Eruv which has a website, and on that website it will tell you at the end of each week, as the Sabbath approaches, whether or not the Eruv is up or not. So this is the Los Angeles Community Eruv, and that's where you see whether it's up. And what it is a collection of wire which is strung from telegraph poles around a certain area of Los Angeles, an area where many Orthodox Jews live. And more generally, an Eruv is a ceremonially demarcated area where activities normally forbidden on the Sabbath can be performed. So it's like a house. You can do certain things in your house on the Sabbath because it's your house. And so there is an ontological question: what is a house? Well, a house has a door, a house has walls, and a house separates the interior of the house from the exterior of the house. So can we create symbolic houses by creating symbolic walls using wires to collect, for instance, utility poles, or using the sides of mountains, which would also work to be walls? And then we make symbolic doorways by using special rubber strips, which are allowed according to the doctrinal authorities who control the formation of Eruvs. So this is what it looks like if there is an Eruv in your town. In other words, you can't see it. You don't know that it's there unless you're Jewish and you observe the Sabbath and you are interested in knowing whether the Eruv is there or not, because it affects how you can behave on the Sabbath. And it's important that you know whether the Eruv is up, because these strands of fishing line sometimes break, and then you don't have an Eruv anymore, and you're just in ordinary space. So the word Eruv comes from the word mingling, and halachically means, according to the Jewish law, what happens in an Eruv is that you're turning a public area into a private area. So again, Los Angeles, the Eruv is up. I'm not sure that that's still here, so I looked the last time in 2006, but I imagine they still have something like a website. Probably it's a more sophisticated one. This is a picture of Tenafly, I guess that's how you pronounce it, in New Jersey, where there is an Eruv, as you can see. And the people, the non-Jewish people living in Tenafly didn't like the fact that they were living in an Eruv, because there's no way in which you can enforce the fact that only Jewish people live or behave in an Eruv. And so there were people in Tenafly who suddenly one day discovered that they were living in an Eruv. And this was annoying somehow. That no one had asked permission, it turned out, to place these little rubber strips on the utility poles, and this apparently contravenes a local ordinance which says that you're not allowed to place signs on poles, even though people do and still do place signs on poles announcing that they've lost their dog or for whatever other reason. So the people were annoyed at these invisible or practically invisible rubber strips, and they were annoyed at the fact that they were now living inside an Eruv. And so they brought the case, which reached as far as the US Supreme Court, which, as we will find out later, is part of the Washington DC Eruv. There are, I think, well, there was once anyway, 35 eruvim in Manhattan. And I think some of them overlap, actually, which is also quite interesting. This is a picture of the Chicago Eruv. And I guess the reason why you have this loop where the loop is that there were no telegraph poles stretching across the loop at the point where the kink occurs. And this is the Washington Eruv, so you can see where the Supreme Court is if you know your Washington geography.
Wow, that's huge.
George,
That's huge.
Yeah.
Like
well,
all the way up to
work
Catholic University.
Maintaining a big Eruv. And so there was an Eruv, probably still is an Eruv in one of the Jewish areas of North London in England. And here they use nylon fishing line. It's a 6.5 square mile enclosed area. And in Barnet, some of the Orthodox Jews actually objected to the formation of the Eruv because it was too lax. So it was enabling people to contravene the Jewish law. And on the other hand, liberal Jews objected because they saw the Eruv as a way of recreating ghettos, and secular liberals objected because they said that creating the Eruv impinges on their human rights to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, which I think is total nonsense. So people see the Eruv as being a way of staining secular territory, even though England is divided into parishes and people live in parishes in every country, and no one there talks about symbolically staining space. This is how the liberal objectors to the Barnet Eruv formulated their objection. Believers were passing through these symbolic gateways, but everyone else was compelled to do so. In other words, to walk between two telegraph poles. And the point is that this is a halachically controlled symbolic space. If you don't believe in the halachical law, then it's as irrelevant to your life as walking into a different parish created by the Anglican Church when you don't believe in Anglican law. And through, all it means is that you're walking underneath a fishing line. So you shouldn't say through, you should say under. Now, why do people find this upsetting? Well, I think that on the one hand, there is an inheritance from the Peace of Westphalia, which concluded the 100 Years' War, roughly speaking. And the Peace of Westphalia was a treaty which was designed to solve a problem that there were hugely complicated religious wars between a hugely complicated network of many of them very tiny sovereign states, which were alternately Protestant or Catholic, depending on the religion of the prince or the bishop. If you have all these mixing of sovereign states, some of which have parts inside the interiors of other sovereign states, then you are in some way contributing to the absence of peace. And so if you had clearer boundaries and you had clearer separations and clearer understandings about to which country people belonged, in such a way that you had a cleaner topology of states, then religious wars would cease. And so the map of Europe is now much simpler than it was before the Peace of Westphalia. This is the map of Europe in 1648. You can see various scattered pink pieces here, which are all the same state. There are many, many other scattered, differently colored pieces here, which belong to the same state, but which are separated by other states. So this is 1914. You see Germany is now one big blue thing. Now, this is an example of Westphalian thinking. Each country should be as close as possible to France in its shape and size, and separation from its neighbors. And in fact, the United States is not as clean as we think, because there are all these Native American reservations, some of which have very strange shapes. In Arizona, you have this area here, which also has parts of non-Indian reservation within it. The reason for the diagonal stripes is because there was a suspicion that there would be valuable minerals in that area, and the idea was that each part would have an equal chance to get some of the valuable minerals. And there are structures of a similarly problematic nature also in Europe. So the most interesting one, I guess, is Lake Constance. So we have Westphalian partitions, which are clean topologies which separate all countries into, or all parishes into topologically continuous and topologically non-perforated units. Now, Lake Constance is a very interesting counterexample. It's in the middle of Europe, and it's bordered by Germany, Switzerland, and Austria. So that's what it looks like. And unfortunately, they've not yet agreed where the boundary lies. So Switzerland says that it runs through the middle of the lake. Austria says that all three countries share sovereignty over the lake. And Germany holds the view that Germany doesn't hold any view. And so anything which might be a matter of dispute as concerns location on Lake Constance is managed by separate treaties. So where you die on Lake Constance, if you die on the lake, is determined by a special treaty. Another kind of non-Westphalian boundary structure was the Berlin Wall, because that was a boundary which pointed only in one direction. The Federal Republic of Germany did not recognize that border. And so you don't really see much of a border from the western side, but from the eastern side you see minefields and so on. And then another kind of border is what you might think of as a fractal border. So this is the Holland and Belgium. And if you look very closely at where the letter B is, you see that the maps are non-Westphalian. So this is a relic of pre-Westphalian times, which still exists. You can still go to this place. And it's so the green is Belgium and the orange is Holland. And you can see there are lots of green bits inside Holland. And there are lots of orange bits inside those green bits inside Holland. And that's what the central Baal looks like. So that's a place, and you can walk around it, and you'll be in Holland in 1 minute, and you'll be in Belgium the next minute, and the next minute you'll be in Holland again. And this is the very so there are houses where the border goes through the house. So you'll be in the bathroom and you'll be in Belgium, and you'll be in the living room and you'll be in Holland. And where a house is, for tax purposes, for instance, or post purposes, depends on where the front door is. And these people moved the front door so that they would be in the country that they wanted to be. So there is only one cemetery, but each gravestone has a flag of Belgium or Holland, depending on which country the deceased was a citizen of. There are 2 post offices, and if you mail the letter in one post office, you need a Belgian stamp, and it will go all the way to Brussels and be sorted and then be sent back to Baal if it's a letter to someone else in Baal. You go to the Dutch post office and mail a letter, even to the same address, it will go to Den Haag or wherever the main central Dutch post office is located. There are 2 churches which are practically face to face on the main street. One is a Catholic church for the Dutch-speaking people, and the other one is a Catholic church for the Belgians. Sorry, did I say Dutch-speaking? For the Dutch people. They speak practically the same language. For the Dutch people, and the one for the Catholic Belgian people. As far as I know, there's very rarely a case of intermarriage between, even though they live next door to each other. So Belgian people typically marry Belgian people. It's easier for tax purposes. And there are 2 counters inside the banks. One for Belgian customers and one for Dutch customers. In the olden days, they had separate currencies, of course, which was a good reason to have separate counters in the bank. Now they all use the euro. In the olden days, there were real national borders, and those real national borders are still marked by yellow lines on the road. So here the national border goes along the road. And then this is Israel and Palestine.